joining us, another guest I love having on. And I got my man JJ Vance, as usual, with me, especially when we're talking about true crime. Oh, oops. Come on. What's going on here? Oh, oops. Come on. What's going on here? Welcome to the Occult Rejects. On this episode, I got a packed house, and it's a very, very special episode, actually, for me. I got Lisa on with us, as usual. We got William Ramsey joining us, another guest I love having on. And I got my man JJ Vance, as usual, with me, especially when we're talking about true crime. Today, we got a very, very special guest. Well, two of them. We have John Ray and his assistant, Lena. If people don't know, and I do have a lot of new listeners now, so maybe they don't even know that I covered Gilgo Beach myself a few months ago. But John Ray is associated with, the Gilgo Beach, I guess, murders. He's been around it. He's probably knows more than the average person would about these cases. And he has, I guess, my opinion, correct me if I'm wrong, you kind of got a team put together, then you're kind of starting to look at some things that I think either law enforcement and other people are just, blindly missing it or not looking at it. I don't know. But it seems like you've kind of been doing your own research and you're presenting your own findings. And I found what you did recently very intriguing. It caught me a little bit off guard, actually. But I am not like other true crime channels out there. I think everybody should be a suspect until they're cleared. So I don't have a problem looking at family members. If just for me, maybe I'm just built different. There's no reason not to. So I did want to get you on because it even does seem like a kind of a controversial opinion, even though I don't think it is for me. So John, thank you very much again. And Lena, thank you for jumping on. Real quick, we'll start with you, John, and then Lena, you can introduce yourself and let people know what your deal is. But John, just give everybody a background about who you are and how you got into Gilgo.
Okay, well, I'm a lawyer practicing in New York and in various parts of the country for 41 years. I am a St. John's University Law School graduate. And I've had my own practice for all that time since I was sworn in back in 1983. I do all kinds of cases, and I've been in many high-profile cases over the course of years that have come to me, and I've pursued them. So I don't have one particular focus in my career. It just doesn't exist. It's many, many different things. But without belaboring that, to speak on behalf of the little girls at the sentencing of this guy named Laffer and his wife, who was driving the car when the shooting took place. So I went there and I decided that the best approach would be to take on the personality of the little girls. And that's what I did in trying to influence the judge in really maximizing the sentences. And so it worked well, and the judge, he accepted what I had done. And one of the reporters that was there were many reporters there who I knew from the Daily News, Steve Barcelo, he called me aside and said, look, there's this woman, Mary Gilbert, who could use your help. And I knew about her from the TV and the newspapers. So I agreed to meet her. I did. And I agreed to represent her only to help her get the FBI to enter the case because she was exceedingly frustrated with the inaction and the poor quality of the Suffolk County Police in their investigation. So I called a press conference in I guess it was either late December of 2011, I think it was, or early January of 2012. And we were at Oak Beach, we called it, and basically the press conference was to announce that we wanted the FBI to come in and that the police department had bungled this thing. I think I lost some favor with the police when I referred to the police commissioner as Inspector Clouseau in the Pink Panther investigation. And because I did that, that was the end of my work, by the way, and at that point in this case. And I thought that, well, at least I thought that was the end of my work. That's all I had agreed to do, pro bono, and off I went. But the police didn't sit well for that. And so the treasurer of the Suffolk County Detectives Union, Vincent Steffen, who was a homicide detective investigating the case, wrote me a 2-page single-spaced letter immediately, told me I was all wet in the attack that I made on the police department. And he then set forth all the reasons why. He claimed to have personal knowledge of what was on the 911 23-minute tape that Shannon Gilbert had called in fear. And he went on in detail. This is very unusual, that a detective is revealing evidence in an ongoing homicide case without apparently the official approval of the authorities, because he writes me the letter on union stationery, police union stationery, not per se on the police department's stationery. So it was highly unusual, the whole thing. And he writes right after Chief of Police James Burke was just appointed, or was about to be appointed, I think it was. That's what it was, yeah. And only days later, Burke pops up as the chief. So I get this very unusual letter tearing me apart and explaining that on the tape, the detective said nobody was excited, nobody was threatened, there was no struggle. Shannon Gilbert was at all times calm, so were the other people who were there, and basically nothing happened on that tape. But he claimed that Shannon seemed confused and probably on drugs, and so she disappeared and was went in the marsh and died. Remember, I'm calling this press conference right after Shannon's remains were found. They were found in mid-December in 2011. So Mary came to that press conference with me. We didn't know what was on the tape. We had only Steffen's word, and it seemed very odd to me. But I dropped it until a few days later, the police department managed to publish that letter as a feature story in the letter's op-ed page of Newsday. And they had crossed out a few things, they had eliminated a few things, but it was essentially that letter. So it was a letter to me that they now published. And this, of course, incensed me that they went and did that. And I decided I would still help out the family, because I said, something's really wrong here. None of this is working the way the police normally work. Something was really off. Yeah, and I've had my experience in cross-examining detectives in homicide cases and other cases. And I smelled the rat. Something was bad. So that's how I came into the case. And then I just remained in the case. I went to the autopsy meeting, which was, again, highly unusual, because when they finally held the autopsy conference with the family, remember that the medical examiner is supposedly an independent body, that independent of the police, a civil body. And they reveal at the autopsy meeting why, the manner and the cause of death. And then they discuss the evidence and so on with the family. So I went with the family along with some of my assistants. And when we got to the meeting, highly unusual, 3 homicide detectives were in the room with their arms folded in a hostile manner, sitting on little metal chairs just to my left as we faced the medical examiner. And every time I asked a question that was maybe intrusive, she got out of her chair and went over to the detectives. They whispered together. She came back and answered the question. So the medical examiner was completely in the thrall of the police department. She was young, she was brand new at her job. And something seemed very odd. Remember, I'm asking questions. I know nothing about this case at this point. I don't have any of the evidence that we later on developed. So that even caused me more concern. So that caused me to go into the marsh to see where the police claim Shannon Gilbert walked and how she really died. We went in the same week, the first week of May, that Shannon had disappeared. And with the same weather conditions, they chose a day for that. And we went in at the same time she would have gone in there if it was true that she had wandered into the marsh as they claimed. So quite a great deal of evidence from doing that. And I realized that the story that the police were telling, that she wandered into the marsh, could not possibly have been physically true. It was impossible. And when we went to where she was found, she was laying on a bush, face up, with a head on a bush, on a sort of an angle. The area was not, there was no water. I mean, the water was in the loam, like it would be in your grass. There's no way she could have drowned, as the police had said before they even found her body. They said she drowned. So nothing was right about what they did. To this day, they're still insisting on the same lie. So
it's almost very smiley face killers.
That's how I explain it. And jumping way forward, we sued the man who called Mary Gilbert and claimed that he had Shannon in his house and medicated her. That was Dr. Peter Hackett. And that suit is still pending as we speak. And from there, just skipping up right up to now, I've thoroughly investigated the case that for the Gilbert family, and then expanded my work when I was asked to help out with Jessica Taylor by people we thought were members of Jessica Taylor's family. Turned out we were wrong, but we didn't know that at the time. So I stepped in to help her as well, to help that situation. And naturally, this thing grew, and various victims called us once Rex Heuermann was arrested, and victims who survived him, who he attacked or stalked. And I took on their cases as well. So,
I wanted to ask, what was your first initial thought when, between, you, I guess, helping and doing your own investigations, and then Rex getting hit with popped for it? What was your initial response to that? Did you even see that coming, or was that a surprise for you?
Well, I had a tip a week before the actual arrest, or actually before the arraignment. The arraignment was July 14th. He was arrested on the 13th. But I had a tip several days before that this was coming down. I didn't know about Rex Heuermann at all. Had no idea about him, but I knew it was somebody, and so it didn't surprise me. In fact, in short order, after the initial shock that he was arrested, immediately pieces of the puzzle began to form, and we could see that the case is overwhelming right away, that Heuermann's involved. And the bigger question becomes, who else is involved besides Heuermann?
Do you think, and this is before we get into, I guess, the stuff that you did on the presentation, one more question. Do you think there could be possibly multiple people?
I do believe it's a reasonable question, a reasonable issue as to whether or not there are other people involved with him in his pursuit of his game. And those people, this circle starts with his own family and spreads from there. There's certainly a collection of evidence that suggests what I just said, and enough evidence to make any reasonable person's mind suspicious that there are such other persons involved. So, and Lena, my assistant here, who's done fabulous work with her skills on the internet, has been able to locate that evidence that I'm talking about now.
Yeah. Oh, real quick, Lena, I don't know. I'm sorry. I might have actually skipped you. You may not have got to introduce yourself.
No worries. I'm Mr. Ray's legal assistant. So I handle all of the cases that we have in the office, and I'm also a researcher. Before I became a legal assistant, I was very interested in, I guess, what people call parapolitics, and especially parapolitics as it pertains to the phenomena of serial killing in the United States specifically.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. All right. JJ, was there anything? I know. Well, I was going to ask this, and then we'll get to the slides. I'm sorry, but I just thought maybe this might be good to bring up now. When it comes to, I know, like kind of law enforcement, John, I'm not exactly sure. I may, from some things that you have said, I would assume that maybe you do think law enforcement might even be dropping the ball or be a problem.
Law enforcement.
Like law enforcement that's involved with even that area of the case.
Yeah, law enforcement indubitably made terrible missteps in the investigation of this entire case up until the time that Rodney Harrison, former police commissioner of Suffolk County, and Ray Tierney, the DA, put their heads together and formed a task force. I don't really know, since that occurred, the quality of the work that the task force is doing, other than what the fruits prove, that they did great work with the DNA. They're doing yeoman's work with pulling things out of electronic devices that yeoman used. Beyond that, I don't know what else is being done. I'm sure hopefully they're working as hard as we've been promised. But there are still huge questions about what the police failed to do and why in this case. And those questions not only remain, but they remain active. And I'd like to see more evidence of why, for example, did the district attorney, who's a rational guy with great integrity, why he would, with the support of the task force, make an announcement that Rex Heuermann was leading two lives, and in the same breath, in his applications to a court of law, he made it in more than one application. He made it. There were actually three, I believe. He made it so that the family members, rather, of the Heuermann family were not involved in any of this, and they were away on vacations each time any of the Gilgo 4 murders took place. To jump to that conclusion, and so early in the investigation, when there's so much unknown evidence, seems precipitous. And I wonder, but people say, well, they are the police. They know. Well, sometimes they don't. They didn't know. They didn't handle the Shannon Gilbert case correctly, and they still haven't. Still haven't, the same task force.
There was I'm glad you brought up the thing about her going away, because I did want to ask, maybe you actually would know, but like, is there evidence that they have that makes them believe they actually went somewhere? Like, is there proof that these people went anywhere?
Well, you would think that the police...
Is there like a ticket, or are they going by like a cell phone ping? Because then anybody could have had your cell phone.
It's hard to know.
Footage, these people went anywhere.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they don't reveal all of their evidence, and I can't expect them to.
I'm just wondering if maybe you actually know that.
But what we do know, what they have shown, is they show that in the case of Maureen Brainerd Barnes in July of 2007, that the Heuermann family, absent Heuermann, of course, were in Atlantic City when Maureen disappeared. She disappears on July 9th, and the district attorney puts an application into the court under oath showing a monthly bill of Rex Heuermann. On that bill in August of 2007, it shows that the family or that the Heuermann paid for this hotel. It was one of these timeshare hotels. We came to learn. We called the hotel and talked to the people there. And in that application that the DA made, there's little entries for arrival underneath the entry itself, underneath the entry that was put into the bill, the monthly statement, showing the arrival date for each hotel. They went to a series of hotels in Atlantic City, which itself was odd. And therefore it showed that the hotel in question they went to on July 6th, so that they were gone on July 6th. Brennan Barnes disappears on July 9th, and the family is checked in at the hotel on July 6th and continues to stay there until I think July 17th, and then went to another hotel. So they were gone. And what Ray Tierney said in his application was, not only is this bill proof that they had an alibi, but he also spoke to Miss Ellerup. And that was the reason for his claim, speaking to Miss Ellerup and this bill. So I and Lena and two others of my staff, we called the hotel and spoke to the manager who was on duty at the time. She graciously pulled up the entries in her computer from the hotel of the arrival and departure times on a computer screen. And she didn't know, Asa Ellerup from a hole in the wall, nor Rex Heuermann. She didn't know anything. She was oblivious to that. And I asked him, can you look for Rex Heuermann? She looked, went through the computer, and couldn't find any name. I said, can you look for Ellerup? She said, oh, Asa, it's right here. And then she went and read off to us what was on the computer. And they checked in. And July 17th, I believe, the family actually checked in. The hotel's bill, or records rather, showed that. She read it off the computer screen to us, and then I questioned her, about all the circumstances of how it came to be on the computer, etc. And it passed muster, the computer and the manager's statement, and she read it off to us again, and we made sure to confirm it. So we spent a good deal of time with her. So the alibi was not real. I pointed this out on January 30th of this year at my symposium that I held at St. John's University to reveal some of this evidence and some of the witnesses and discuss the evidence we had regarding Shannon Gilbert with the public. At that symposium, I made mention of what I just told you. As a result of that, immediately, Robert Macedonio, the lawyer for Asa Ellerup, and Ves Matev, the lawyer for the two children, Victoria and Chris, both immediately said John Ray is a liar. He made this up. It can't be. I'm just trying to get publicity, and that they would prove it to be so. So what I had, and I, of course, also sent it to the district attorney in just the way I've explained it to you. The district attorney has since then remained silent as to what I sent them. They've never rebutted it, refuted it, done anything about it that I can see. And to this day, as we speak, Macedonio and Matev have been silent. They didn't prove that I was a liar, or didn't even attempt to try, because we know what happened. It was confirmed what happened with I and 3 eyewitnesses that night. So
You know, I thought it was interesting with that. I saw that lawyer, the lawyer of the two children recently, I think, trying to deny your claims.
Yeah.
I saw him on something, True Crime Network or something like that. And I think he was like trying to give reasons about like why her art is the way it is. And like I've been saying, and I think I mentioned it to you earlier, and we'll probably get to it eventually. I do think when it comes to the occult or witchcraft, I do think you're getting that probably more from Asa and her sister. And I think maybe that's why Victoria is the way she is. But they did mention that her art is because she's highly influenced by Francis Bacon. And I was like, you just added to my theory. I mean,
Francis Bacon was a big occultist.
He's a saint in the OTO Gnostic Mass, if you want to read his name. Well.
They also mentioned Hieronymus Bosch, the 16th century, I believe it was, Dutch artist who paints pictures of purgatory and hell and various other things like that. And of course they're nowhere near as pornish as as outrageous as what she was looking at, Victoria was looking at. But nonetheless, Hieronymus Bosch is, if that's her interest. Well, I like Hieronymus. I find it amusing to look at some of the silly things that he painted. And he is famous. So is Bacon famous. But nonetheless, the subject matter is the subject matter that we're talking about. Why does she happen to have those two as her favorites and the other ones that she's looking at? It's very consistent, not inconsistent. I think what he does is he fires a torpedo at himself in pointing this out. And by the way, you'll notice he never really denied that she was looking at the items that we had put up in our press conference. He tacitly admitted it.
I honestly thought, like, again, this goes for like, I guess some people, especially true crime, like maybe you're not totally paying attention to what's going on or whatever, or you just take somebody who's got a suit on, you just take everything that comes out of their worth as gold. But it's like, if you listen to what this guy just said, he really did not help her case. That was my opinion. I was like, most people be like, oh yeah, see that? Yeah, it's just, influence. It's no big deal. It's like, did you hear what he said? I don't know.
If only those images were influenced by Bacon and Hieronymus Bosch, they might be a little bit more aesthetically appealing, but they're like gore, furry images. It's really not even at the level of Bacon and Bosch.
If I can say something real quick, that I'm so glad, Mr. Ray, that you are saying what in terms of with DA, because I felt that the moment that the DA was speaking, that the push for the family being innocent was very contrived, that immediately he went into this whole, they were not in the country, they were not in the location. I mean, it was almost in the same breath of, we arrested Rex, but no, the mom and the children are not involved. And every time that he was questioned, he was almost bringing that narrative up over and over and over, almost to make sure that everyone is clear on what he's saying. And then with Maldonado and Bitev coming on board, it seemed like there was a concerted effort between the DA and them too. And when he did mention, just like you said, that they had spoken to Ellerup, it was almost like, how is she not under suspicion? If there is hair DNA on the bodies at that moment, I would assume that she is now under suspicion. And for them to automatically jump to the conclusion of like, oh, it's transferred DNA. You don't even know if it's transferred. You have no idea. And yet all of a sudden we're being pushed this narrative in front of everybody's face that yes, we found technically more evidence, more actual substantial, tangible evidence on the bodies implicating Asa, not implicating Rex, implicating Asa, but she is not under suspicion because she just was not in the country. And not because they photographed her in Iceland, but because her cell phone pinged somewhere else. And if you're not going to use, if you're going to, I guess, use the pinging of Asa being in another country and say, well, that's substantial, or what is it, like subjective, then you can't use Rex's ping either, because you're using both on the same level, but yet you're not including the hair DNA, which we will get into later because I have more questions about that. But I'm so glad that you said all this, because it is contrived. It seemed contrived, and it seems like a concerted effort. 100%.
Well, consider this though. This is educated guesswork, as in almost all investigations are until the final real evidence is gathered together. Mm-hmm. Well, the district attorney is bound to present what his team shows him, just as I am, and therefore what he was shown by his police workers and detectives is very much going to control the outcome of what he presents to the grand jury. Now, I don't know if Asa Ellerup and Victoria Heuermann and Chris Heuermann testified at the grand jury. I have no knowledge of that. I would assume if they're cooperating and speaking to the DA, as the DA suggested that Asa was doing, that they would have been used in the grand jury, because after all, they're witnesses. They're witnesses to so much in the Heuermann history. So there's a good chance that they were called into the grand jury. That would mean that either they were given immunity, meaning that there was guilt, but they were allowed to testify nonetheless, or being totally innocent and told they were not actual targets, they testified without immunity. Either way, that creates a problem if that's true. But if it's true that they actually testified, or any one of them testified in the grand jury, now becomes the problem. Once the DA has presented this information, if he did through the Heuermanns in any way to the grand jury, he's stuck with that story, isn't he?
Yes, he is.
That's the story, and that story that they appear to have. They're very clever people, by the way. They're not the slugs that they tried to appear to be when they were first interviewed, by no means. And they appear to have sold a really bad bill of goods to the district attorney, and well, maybe not him personally, but to the staff that is involved in this investigation. I don't know that to be true, but I'd say it's a reasonable speculation. In any event, they certainly have much more information that's guilt-ridden in type of information than was first revealed. They definitely attempted, this Heuermann family, to conceal from the public and from, I guess, law enforcement accordingly, who they really were. When they first appeared, you see Mrs. Heuermann come out looking like this, bedraggled, worn-out old lady with a walking stick of some kind, and barely able to think and talk and sort of looking around. And her daughter comes out dressed as a 13-year-old schoolgirl with a little bun on the top of her head and these draped clothings and a school bag over the front rather than over the back. And with the sleeves were even covered over her hands. No makeup. She looks like a little girl. And likewise, the son, who we understand has issues, but nonetheless, there he was. And there you're looking at her picture with the little blue. I guess that's a Scandinavian bag that she's wearing. So this is what they tried to portray. And when the reporters asked Mrs. Ellerup questions, she commiserated and thought and sort of mumbled an answer. And so, the idea was, feel sorry for us. Look what's happened to us. But that wasn't true. That's not who they are. And that's not who Mrs. Ellerup is at all. She's a very bright lady. And the daughter, likewise. And the daughter is not that little girl. The daughter is the one you see in the picture as you face the screen on the left. She is a Gothic character. That's really her, believe it or not. That's the same girl. And that's her own portrait of herself. So she is not the little girl that she portrayed. So why are they trying to fool the public and possibly law enforcement as well about who they are? Why, in God's name, under these circumstances, would that happen and not have any consequences?
No, I definitely think the way they have pushed the family to the public has already kind of made you sympathetic. For sure. Or, yeah, I definitely get what you're saying with that. I totally agree. We'll go here too. Might as well just go with your slides now. We'll get to your presentation. All right, so I guess this is her LinkedIn account, and that's her picture too.
Yeah, you'll notice the most interesting part of this LinkedIn account is at the bottom. She says she volunteers for Bidoe, which is a Best Friends Animal Society partner in New York City. They also have a Hamptons location, I believe. But yeah, in her LinkedIn, she links a website to her art, venandemodtour.art, which has been taken down. You can find it on the Internet Archive. And yeah, but the Best Friends Animal Society connection was very interesting to me. Because Joanna Ellerup, the sister of Asa, I would not be surprised if there was a similar connection there. She's very interested in rescuing animals. She has lots of pets. She espouses a lot. She's seemingly an occultist, and she espouses a lot of the rhetoric that Best Friends Animal Society does, specifically about pit bulls. And I was able to find that on her Facebook, she did adopt a dog from a Best Friends Animal Society partnered shelter. I'm sure a lot of people have, but that's the closest I've been able to find.
Yo, I'm sorry, I can't help but laugh when you mention the Best Friends animal. I just know of them synonymously being associated with the Process Church.
Yep.
Basically, animals. Wow, that's just so weird.
And she's a furry.
It's really a good thing for animals, I guess.
Well, if I may interject here real quick, Nick, regarding animals and the vicinity of Rex Heuermann's home, it seems that there was a number of animal sacrifices that were found there in the immediate vicinity in and around his arrest time last summer. I don't know if that's been a trend since or beforehand, but it certainly was in the immediate time frame around the arrest of Heuermann.
Yeah, there have been a lot of animal sacrifices on Long Island, and interestingly, the organization that's in charge of investigating animal sacrifices, I believe it's the SPCA, and they're almost like police officers. They can make arrests and interview people at their will. The man who heads that actually is an Oak Beach resident. Oak Beach being the community in which Shannon disappeared.
Sure.
Yeah, there was definitely, growing up on Long Island where I was, I don't know why, maybe because near Lake Ronkonkoma, people were already kind of had the idea of the lady in the lake killing a child, a male child every year, whatever. I guess maybe because they're already predisposed to paranormal or ghost stories, but there was a lot of times where there was animal disappearances, and it even happened to me growing up, and there was a lot of talk of animal sacrifice and satanic shit going on Long Island. Mm. I remember that as a child. Hearing stuff like that from grown-ups. It was just very weird.
One thing about Joanna that I noticed that was interesting that stuck out to us, some of the states that when Rex was arrested, all of a sudden you heard murmurings of other states looking into, pulling up some of their cold cases to see if it matched some of the cases being alleged towards Rex, and some of those being Alaska, and the other one, I believe it was New Mexico or Arizona. It was Arizona. Yep. And what was interesting is that Joanna Ellerup has a pharmacy degree with actual licenses in New York, Arizona, and Alaska.
Yeah, I found that interesting too. She also has a license for architecture. I believe that also goes for Arizona, if I'm not mistaken. And I do know from background checks that Rex Heuermann himself is associated with addresses in Alaska and Arizona and New Mexico.
So when they asked her, when they put a microphone in her face and they were asking her, have you heard from your sister? She's like, no, we know less than you do. We haven't even spoken. We haven't spoken at all. Mm-hmm. And yet, no, I mean, how would you not? It almost seems like they're connected with the actual places of being.
Well, there's a good modicum of information regarding the sisters' interests that we've been able to find on the internet. And her interests are also like Victoria's and like Osa's, for what little is left of Osa's social media, because she took it all down. They're interested in human sacrifice. This is the sister now. She's interested in pagan what is it, sort of a pagan religion and pagan groups called the Dacians from the old Roman Dacia, D-A-C-I-A. that was identified with Danes in the Middle Ages, and that deal with also with human sacrifice and cannibalism. She's associated herself with various. Her stories deal with murders. There's other things that we have, and
this is Joanne, right? You're talking about Joanna?
Joanna,
Yeah. Look at her Facebook ever. Yeah, she has a public Facebook, and she's constantly posting about various pagan concepts. There's a post about thousands welcoming the summer solstice at Stonehenge. I mean, there's really a picture of a witch burning on a stake. If you peruse through her friends list, you'll see that she's probably part of a coven. All of her closest friends also literally post that they're witches. She posts that she is of ancient Dacian stock. So as somebody who's interested in occultism, she obviously knows that the Dacians were, I believe, one of the groups that resisted in the Roman Empire, resisted Christianity the longest. And they're into lycanthropy. And I believe somebody commented this on a YouTube video. I have to do more research, but that they were famed in battle for inducing hypnosis, which I also found interesting. Yeah, and what's the best part, I'm just looking at my notes here. On her Facebook, she posted some books that her mother had owned, and she said she's held on to them for 35 years. The books are Harvest Home and Crowned Heads by Thomas Tryon, and a book called The Q Document. Harvest Home is essentially like a retelling of The Wicker Man, but it's set in New England, so it's about, pagan agricultural ritual sacrifice. Crowned Heads is sort of like a novella of vignettes. One of the vignettes is actually, have you guys heard of the Ramon Navarro murder in Laurel Canyon?
Yes.
Oh, maybe I didn't forget.
Almost like a Mansonoid conspiracy in which a Golden Age actor was murdered. It seemed ritualistic. It was on Halloween Eve, too. So that's one of the stories that Mom Ellerup was looking at. And the Q Document is even more bizarre. It's by a guy named James Hall Roberts. It's a pseudonym, actually, for Robert Lipscomb Duncan. I'll just read what it's about really quickly, but this is the blurb that it gives when you go to buy this book. In Tokyo, Cooper, spiritually and emotionally gutted, has sold his mind to Victor Hawkins, who has, quote, most unusual traffic, end quote, in documents and human beings, little girls. Cooper's work is to appraise and verify papers and letters, among them now the Q Document, once in the hands of a former Jewish scholar who became a Nazi. The document, a contemporary source for the four Gospels, has a potential for heresy which could destroy Christianity, and once certified, Victor plans to sell it to the Red Chinese. Cooper, partly through a Father O'Connor, tries to make him see the spiritual light, partly through Miyoko, an 11-year-old child he rescues and hides from Victor's trafficking enterprise, and partly through Willa, his mistress, is moved to act. If he can't disprove the document, he is ready to destroy it. And sort of like a occult spiritualist tale that deals with Nazism and child trafficking. So those are the books that Joanna is saying that her mother possessed, none of which are very normal.
and keep in mind that when Asa puts on the image that she portrays sitting in front of her home, and she's sitting there, and if you focus up close on her left arm, I believe, you will see that she's wearing a little string sort of bracelet with an evil eye device attached to it. Now that comes from the Kabbalah cultish movement, that the people who follow the Kabbalah, and it's not just Jewish cults, but many of these other Satanist and other type cults, similar cults, they follow it as well. And that particular item is mentioned in the Old Testament, and that's why it makes its way into the Kabbalah, and it's been a cultish symbol that they use. And there she is, right, with that on. I mean, why is she wearing that right on the camera?
Well, I can tell you this, John. If you do a little bit of work on the actual hair sample that was collected off of the bodies, it belongs to a very rare haploid group. And so hair in itself is mitochondrial DNA, and it's only maternal based. You don't get any paternal base out of your mitochondrial DNA, and mitochondrial doesn't degrade as fast as DNA in and of itself. But the mitochondrial DNA that they were able to collect off of these hair samples from these bodies belonged to a haploid group of K1C2, and that is a very rare haploid group, and it is actually tied to a ancestral Jewish maternal line, with some occurrences in Germanic lines that are more up further into the Netherlands and so forth.
Well, that's interesting. I'm not aware of any connections with Judaism in any way with these people.
Nor am I saying that they are, but the actual DNA says so.
Interesting.
Well,
One thing I did want to mention real quick, just to kind of add to what you were saying about her bracelet. This is another. I find this very weird, and this is why I was even saying I think your work really helps add to some of mine that I did in the past. No lie, probably within 2 weeks of Rex's arrest, we were already covering on my show, thinking that Asa and his sister might have been involved. I was even pointing out how when Asa got home, they got to snap a picture of her. She has that red Kabbalah bracelet on, and she's even got a checkered keychain in her hand. I mean, how much more symbolic can you get?
Interesting.
And keys in general. I mean, keys are very occult, but you got a checkered thing with that, and then you got the red Kabbalah bracelet on. Just to me, I do think that there is definitely Kabbalistic influence.
We know that Joanna certainly was interested in the Kabbalah. I want to credit Desert Rain, by the way, on Twitter. I believe her handle is Hoya Flower, but she's a really excellent researcher, and she's like some of the stuff that I'm talking about today. Like if I do talk about some Twitters of Joanna's, this is stuff that actually Desert Rain showed to me. So shout out to her. But Joanna on her YouTube, and I can send you guys these links too if you don't already have it or have already seen this, but she watches videos and she's favorited videos about Luciferianism, Gnosticism, and the Kabbalah.
Yeah, I definitely think there's Kabbalistic influences, and not to get like too out there with it already, but I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but I do also think some of it seems very close to certain stories or chapters in Aleister Crowley's Book of Lies. There is a Peaches in that book who also gets separated from her child. There's Babylon, which has happened in the town of Babylon. There's Oyster Bay. There's actually a lot of weird, even numerical in people's names that tie to that. Some of the chapters in that book. It's kind of odd, actually.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of coincidences that are coincidences.
Yeah, it really could be that. That really could be that. But I do think that there.
What's at issue rather is not that. I'm not suggesting conclusion that there's a witchcraft operation and that they're involved directly with the family and so on. I'm suggesting that there's enough evidence to look into it.
Yeah.
Why in the world would this woman be wearing a Kabbalah bracelet in the picture when she appears in front of the public? There's something in that, so it needs to be.
Nick, if you want to bring that picture up, I have that picture of her holding.
Yeah.
You popped it up there. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Check it.
I would agree with you, John. There's enough to look into her.
There's a better picture than that of it. You can see.
I have one too. Try this. Can you pop that in, Nick?
Yeah.
And speaking of Crowley, Desert Rain sent me that she being Joanna actually followed the Tahuti Lodge of New York City, which is the OTO.
Yeah, I've actually.
As of today, as in the last couple hours, she's still
follows it. And I have the screenshot.
Yeah, that is really weird.
See the red on her left hand, wrist rather. That's it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So.
Sorry. Oh, here. Let me pull up. All right. So now we got some time still, if you don't mind. Let's get more into like your actual presentation, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yeah. Stick to your stuff. Get back to it.
With that picture, you mean?
Yeah, I guess. Well, no, this is just one of her outfits. Now, this, I think you're saying.
That outfit should not be ignored because if you look at it, under this, you have to look at these things that we're looking at, such as this photo, under the circumstances. the circumstances are not neutral. This is not just some ordinary 27-year-old girl who decides to, that day she picks up that particular blouse and she likes it and walks around in it. Look at the picture. She's coming there. I think she's coming from her house. I could be wrong, but wherever that day she chooses when she goes in front of the media to wear a shirt with a human skeleton on it. Bad taste, sure, could be, but under the circumstances, could it be more? Is she making an announcement, just like she does with the drawings and paintings she's made and the things that she's looked at?
I think, somebody had said this in the chat before. Sorry, I can't remember the name, or I give you credit, but they even made it was a good opinion. I thought, even the way that she looks should still, in some way, probably reflect the family life. So, like what I'm getting, I think what they were getting at, regardless if you don't want to think that she was actually involved with the crimes, this is probably at least a side effect of something going wrong in that house, in that family. So I mean, even regardless, I think that still could be, if people don't want to look at it that horribly, I think you should still at least wonder, well, is there an issue, and that's why she dresses like that. But
I'm with all the negative people who cast aspersion on the work we're doing, they'll say, "Oh, look, he pointed out a shirt, and that's enough evidence to convict her and make her part of this." And that'll be the tag. That's just not what I said, nor what I meant, and yet that's what I've been tagged with by some of them, the opposition, so to speak. They on the internet, by the way.
Yeah.
Right.
Which doesn't really matter then.
Out of context. I'm really saying it's just another piece that's very consistent with the entire picture that this girl herself has managed to paint, Victoria, that is, through her own work and the work that she was looking at. And there's more. I mean, there's someone posted recently. I was on Saturday morning, I believe, very early in the morning. I was up getting ready to work, and on the Reddit internet, believe it or not, was posted other works of Victoria, drawings that she had made, and they were very consistent with the other pictures that she had been looking at. That post had been taken down almost immediately, and the comments that came with it. But it was...
That's, I think, is another weird thing. I think Lisa had mentioned it to me when we were talking about this situation, that it's like, why are you pulling this stuff down right away as well? Like, that just looks suspect in itself.
Yeah. Well, those pictures that you just showed are pictures from the Detective Jack Huddleston book that was on the kitchen table when the authorities came in on the second warrant, and Victoria was home alone. That book was on the kitchen table, and it contained all those horror pictures, as well as dismemberings of sex workers. So
Has it been released why they issued a second search, or why they issued a second warrant for a search? What was the reason for them submitting?
I don't know. I mean, they haven't. We don't have any dispositive claims that I know of in that regard yet. We will, though. It will come.
Yeah, no, for sure.
But look at that. I mean,
jeez.
Is that what you keep on your kitchen table?
I was just thinking, this is what you have on a coffee table?
Right.
Some people online are outing themselves as literally having this on their coffee tables.
So, are these circumstances in the body of circumstantial evidence that should be considered in investigating the circumstances in that home?
You know what I thought was interesting? That the art of the room. How there's it almost looked like maybe it was a kill room or something. I found that.
Yeah, Talking about the girl, the beat up girl, the big picture that they seized.
Or the basement with the blood smears.
Yes, that one. I thought that was like kind of creepy and weird. I was like, is that from like self-experience or like you knew about it?
That was from the account Lelyra, and a lot of people have come and said that because she was following 30 different accounts on Tumblr, that doesn't necessarily mean that she was a fan of Lelyra specifically. Though 30 accounts is really not that many. Some people follow hundreds and thousands. But Victoria on DeviantArt only followed about 4 to 6 accounts, and Lelyra was one of them. So it is certainly a blog that she is interested in. And all of those like horribly grotesque images were circulated by Lelyra, including that one.
That's interesting.
JJ, I know I ended up getting off of it before, but like, wasn't there some stuff that you even had like weird questions about like the police and connections and stuff?
Sure. No, it's not a problem. Yeah, John, it's great having y'all join us. Appreciate y'all's time joining us for this conversation. I've actually been following this case myself. Seen a lot of your interviews and press conferences over the years, especially relative to comments around James Burke, who to me still seems like an interesting person in this case. I'd be curious to understand kind of where you see that, where his circumstances fall into this whole scenario still, and how that kind of fits in with the new revelations that y'all have discovered. And also, it seems like Rex Heuermann has some familial connections within the Suffolk County Police Department in the upper ranks, and maybe you have some thoughts on that as well. I believe it's his first cousin, once removed. I believe it was the former captain and deputy commissioner, leading up to the time where James Burke testified in some important trials, I think in the late 70s. So kind of butts up to that same time frame. It just seems like there's a lot of inbred nature to this law enforcement community of Suffolk County surrounding this case.
Yeah, I think that Heuermann's connection to the police through his family comes through Nassau County Police Department. And,
was it Nassau? Okay.
Yeah, and it's his uncle,
Craig,
who was a chief assistant to a great police commissioner of his time, Francis Looney. And I knew Francis Looney growing up. I knew the whole Looney family. I grew up with some of the family members, and they're great people. They're not. There's no implication about them at all. But Looney's assistant, and Looney was a very powerful man, and the whole Looney family was not only in Nassau County but in the Catholic Church, and he was assisted by Heuermann's uncle. So there were connections there. I don't know what they mean. I as I sit here now, I have no idea if they mean anything whatsoever.
Sure.
But I mean, at least I looked, to see what was what on that score. The Heuermann has other really weird connections through his first cousin from Merrick. Now, mind you, he's from Massapequa Park. Merrick is a 10 to 15 minute drive going west along Sunrise Highway to another South Shore community, which is Merrick, and they're contemporaries of one another. His cousin, his name was Kenneth, I believe, and Kenneth Heuermann, and Kenneth became a Lutheran pastor. So, there was a very strong connection in Rex Heuermann's family with the Catholic Church.
I'm going to ask about this.
Very strong connection with the Lutheran Church as well during those ecumenical times of the 1970s and 80s, and in the churches, the respective churches. Well, that Heuermann was a pervert of the worst kind who had tortured little children and ended up, I think, going to jail for it. He was accused of terrible, terrible things that he did, and Lena can expound upon that. But we'll hold that thought and frame it for a moment. There was a connection between Heuermann and his cousin. You can't avoid that. That's a very different thing under these circumstances that we know of. But also, addressing the Burke issue, And we'll come back to Kenneth Heuermann. But on the Burke issue, Burke seems to have become a sideshow in this whole thing, pushed aside, as it were, when he was singularly responsible for frustrating the entire investigation, not only of Shannon Gilbert and her disappearance, but of all the others as well, the other victims. And he did so in a way that cannot be described as anything but willful. He told the FBI to step down to get out of the case. He kept the state police department out of the case. He kept the Nassau County Police Department out of the case, pushed them aside. And he just kept control himself as an underling of Thomas Spoder, as it were, the district attorney, during the period of time that I had entered into the case back in 2011 and carrying it forward until Burke finally ends up going to jail, along with Thomas Spoder and Chris McPartland, his assistant. So,
hey, Nick, can you drop that in? That's a picture of Looney with George Heuermann. There you go. Thanks.
Oh, nice.
It's a good picture.
Yeah, I think those are great points around the Burke circumstances, because it seems like, and I maybe just be looking into the circumstances too much, that everyone surrounding the Burke circumstances, Burke and Christopher Lowe, both have looming charges over their head right now. One could infer that's almost to keep these individuals quiet about the circumstances surrounding this case. However, also it could be that they're also just guilty in those events that they've been charged with. It just seems like that would be a good way to silence some witnesses to have looming charges above their heads. And two of the key people, Burke and the individual who stole his duffel bag, seem to have a lot more answers that could provide clarity in this case. That's what it kind of looks like from my perspective.
Yeah, well, just focusing on Burke again, consider this. Here he is, completely in control of the police department's investigation. Now he gets busted for slapping around, punching around Christopher Loeb as he's held in the precinct, because Loeb broke into Burke's car and found a duffel bag filled with porn that is later on claimed by Loeb to be snuff films, but certainly was some kind of porn. And so he gets beat up. Then there's a cover up of that, and all of a sudden Burke topples from the pinnacle that he was on, and he goes to jail. Now, mind you, this is a guy whose predilection, while he was a narc cop and while he was a street cop, was for sex workers. And so much so that that when he found Loretta Rickenbacker on the streets in Amityville, he made her into his girlfriend. He allowed her to have his gun twice, and he got busted in rank as he climbed up the ladder in the police department. So it was because of sex workers that he got in trouble in the first place. I know a lot about what happened with Loretta Rickenbacker because I became her lawyer.
Oh, wow.
And she told me a great many things about the behavior of Burke. He dressed in silk underwears, girls' underwears, and he liked to dress up as a girl, and he was kind of like the passive actor. He wasn't the aggressor in their sex trysts, and they would smoke crack together. He would take that girl, well, of course, this is years ago, he would take her, Loretta, to police functions. She'd get all decked up, and he would bring, you mean to tell me the police department didn't notice that? And yet they promoted him? You think that Spoder alone could have affected that? I don't think so. I think it had to be a lot of people in the middle and upper ranks that helped Burke climb. Why did they do so? Well, that's a question that's never been answered. And then there's a white, Loretta was African-American. Then he has a white sex madam who is running a prostitution ring out of his home with a beeper. And he brings her to these affairs as well, dresses her up, and off they go. And he lives with her. So,
and this person, by the way, the woman who ran the escort service with Burke, she now lives in Rhode Island. Rex actually had an apartment down the block from where her house was. And when Burke was most recently, I believe this is according to the Daily Mail in 2023, but when Burke was most recently arrested for soliciting somebody in a park in Farmingville, I believe an undercover officer, he was driving a rental car with Rhode Island plates.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's kept that connection in Rhode Island. And consider that. Now, here you are. You've been humiliated, disgraced in every way possible if you're Burke. And now he goes under those circumstances, knowing that he's certainly persona non grata, and finds his way to a place which is notorious for gay men to troll and pick up other people.
I could have told you that.
On Bald Hill.
I've never been there. I knew that. If you live on Long Island, you know what's going on over there.
It's like the rest stops along the Long Island Expressway, a similar place. And he goes there. I've had clients from that place who got busted for exactly what Burke did. And then he goes and he doesn't just sit passively waiting for somebody to knock on his window, right? Which is what happens there. But instead, he is the aggressor. He's knocking on windows and asks to give oral sex to this guy. All right. Now, who turns out to be a park ranger or something.
Mm-hmm.
So why in the world? Did anybody stop and say, okay, so he's sick. Oh, okay. He's got a problem. Okay. All that. Okay. Does it ever occur that that problem is long-standing and intricately it was supported by, encouraged by, grew hand in hand with members of the police department?
Sure.
Mr. Wright, didn't Spoda have history with Burke in that he groomed him or that he found him? I think he had something had happened either on a playground or something in high school that he was arrested for assault or something like that, if I'm remembering that correctly.
The Pius case?
Yes.
John Pius?
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's even a fractured story. I mean, I remember it so well in the book King Jimmy, the author Gus
Garcia Roberts.
Garcia. Thank you. Spends a lot of time on that case, and I was involved in every other case in that book except for that case. It was before I had my practice started. So, but in any event, John Pius dies a horrible death as a little boy. He gets knocked off his bicycle, and these other boys are a little gang, a little group who Burke belonged to, and his brother apparently belonged to as well. And this group shoves rocks down this poor little boy's throat and kills him. A horrifying thing. Spoda was a prosecuting district attorney on that case at the time, and he had Burke as one of his key witnesses in the grand jury to testify against the kids who did that. Burke claiming he wasn't present when this occurred, but that he knew about it from some of the others that were involved in this. And it was bizarrely, and I think wrongly claimed, that this was over a stolen bicycle that this occurred. I don't believe that for a minute. I believe it was over sex. But in any event, Burke is involved right from the beginning in this nefarious type stuff, and then he gets promoted. He joins the police department, I think, as a cadet, moves his way up in the ranks. You can't convince me. I know the police well enough. You can't convince me, at least, and I don't think any reasonable cop would differ with me. You can't convince me that it was Spoda alone who managed, through all of Burke's troubles with prostitution and the like, to get him promoted all the way up to chief of police alone. That is extremely unlikely. Cops who notice every detail, that's their job, that's the way they live, didn't notice the details of Burke's life and allowed him to climb the ladder of success. There's something very wrong with that whole picture, that story that hasn't been told yet. But Burke, I think, he doesn't play a peripheral part. And so there needs to be more of a look at who he really was and who he associated with. We know that he went to certain bars over on Route 110. I forgot the name of the bar. But there was a bar. Gossips, yeah. They had two, like they do in New York, they had two levels, the legitimate and the illegitimate. The legitimate was on the top floor. And, you go in, you have a drink, and you get to talk to everybody, and it's nice. You go downstairs, and the real action is there with the sex workers and so on, and the perversions. And Burke would go there. Bisset would go there. My investigation has taken us to know through eyewitnesses who've spoken with me now that Heuermann would frequent all of these different kinds of bars in New York City as well as on Long Island. Bars, illegitimate things going on, and where girls are doing strip dancing, and then things get out of hand, shall we say? And I have eyewitnesses who identified him in these bars. So these are the same bars that Burke frequented. There's much more to be looked at. The trouble that I would think the task force has is keeping control of the evidence, keeping the focus. And sometimes what happens with police is that they've got the big fish, they caught him, and they don't want to be distracted by the little fish. So they try to keep everything narrow in their investigation, and a lot of things get ignored as it goes along, just because the sheer volume of information dealing with these cults, for example, dealing with people in bars. So in New York, just in Long Island alone, just in New York City, and then we have Philadelphia, and we have Virginia, and we have Las Vegas, and so on and so on and so on. We have north of Boston place. To track it all is just an enormous task, and I give those. If the task force is doing that, good for them. It's what should happen, but it's extremely hard to do.
Sure, I think those are great points. I actually have a career in Air Force military police as a background for 20 years of my background. So I can understand what you're saying as far as, you're not really producing these kind of activities within a law enforcement organization unless the culture within that organization is kind of accepted amongst some other parties. So I think you're on point with that for sure. Yeah, and it's interesting. So you're saying that Bisset's the guy that was a distributor of the burlap sacks in the region, right, at the landscaping business?
Well, we don't know if he distributed those sacks or not. We have no idea of that.
Sure.
But
he was one of the local regional distributors of burlap sacks in general, right?
Well, he was that. He was one of the largest wholesale landscaping operations on Long Island. He owned
that.
Deer Park and one in Medford on Long Island. And his name keeps coming up, and Dominic Barone, who was the head of I guess he was chief of police, I think he was chief of police back in 2011. He held a press conference when the wires went crazy, so to speak, in the internet world, saying, aha, Bisset is the guy because of the burlap sacks that were found. And he held a press conference to say, no, Bisset is not a suspect in the case. So Bisset kind of disappeared after that in terms of the interest in him. But it should not have. That should not have happened because Bisset was involved with some of the real characters that are important in this case.
Sure, it sounds like it. Yeah.
Sometimes in a peripheral way and sometimes in a direct way. But, for example, Long Island is a multifaceted, many different communities, hundreds of communities.
He's right. I can definitely co-sign that.
Separate communities. Oak Beach is the teeniest one of them. It's got 600 people in the association, something like that. It's a tiny little, and set up way off from the main land of the island. It's on the beach basically. It's a beach community. With that in mind, when Shannon runs from Brewer's house and knocks on doors, and Coletti's door, and then goes and knocks on Mrs. Brennan's door, in that little tiny circle of people that I just mentioned, and their houses, which are just near one another in a very tight circle, is the house of a man whose son was a very close friend of Peter Hackett's son and Thomas Canning's son. And Sal Aversano was the owner of that house. When I took the testimony of Thomas Canning, the man who was called by Mrs. Brennan to come look for Shannon when Shannon had pulled and tried to get into the door of Brennan's house, Mr. Canning testified and blurted it out on his own. I hadn't even asked him that he was very upset as a landscaper, that's what he was, for the Oak Beach community, because he bought all his wholesale goods and he went and made terms with Jimmy Bisset.
Oh.
And he said the thing that really ticked him off was that you never hear of a wholesaler competing with his own customers in the street, right? That would be crazy. Bisset personally came and serviced Sal Aversano's property in Oak Beach. And this ticked off to no end Thomas Canning. And he turned against Bisset for that reason. Point being, Bisset was directly involved in the Oak Beach community. What in God's name is going on there?
Sure.
That of all places, that's where he managed to violate all the rules that he would normally follow for profitability purposes.
Sure.
Does that make any sense? But I have that under oath. I have that testimony. In addition, we have other witnesses who connect Bisset with the Oak Beach situation and with Shannon Gilbert. But we also have witnesses who've now come forward who've said that they personally experienced Bisset at a bar in a dance club on Long Island with Rex Heuermann.
Wow.
And that Rex Heuermann was there, and he would frequent this place. He was a regular in this place where he would receive massages, and he just aside for a moment, if we take into account what the district attorney himself admitted, and I had previously suggested and was attacked, that Heuermann had hundreds of sex workers coming to his house, that over the years they were servicing him in his house. You take that, you take the murders that he's involved in, and you take all the other circumstances we know about Heuermann. How in God's name did he run a life at all? He was constantly involved in all these sexual activities, going to sexual bars. I mean, how could his family not know about that? And here we have now witnesses coming in saying, yep, and then a BDSM bar in New York City that he would frequent.
Wow.
And there's eyewitnesses to that too.
Pandora's Box. And I noticed some of the comments on the talk we did with you, William. People commented that Roger Stone had frequented Pandora's Box. If anybody has more information on that, I'd be really interested in hearing about that, because I had no idea.
Either did I.
William,
so I guess I digress, and I was going to digress from the question of Heuermann's cousin, and Lena was going to talk about that.
Yeah, we talked about it on William's show too, but Heuermann's first cousin, once removed, I believe, Kenneth Heuermann, he was a satanic ritual abuser. Part of the satanic ritual abuse, which would occur within the Lutheran Church, is that I believe child pornography was being produced. The victim, R.W., would be photographed with a Polaroid camera being abused by Kenneth Heuermann and several other men. And that's an interesting through line, too, with Rex Heuermann himself and perhaps even Burke, people who have interest in snuff films and the production of them. And I think there's also a whole history of that on Long Island. If you look back at like The Son of Sam, David Berkowitz stuff, Roy Radin would hold his perverse parties out here with Tony Fillet, and he would donate beneficently to the Suffolk County PBA, who would protect the parties. And he had the pagan MC, sort of palace guards, who were running drugs and perhaps women for him as well. So there's all sorts of like connections that could be made, but there just needs to be more evidence. But yeah, there certainly seems to be like a family pattern of sexual abuse.
Yeah, I read that, and most of that lawsuit, it really was something else. The civil suit, which was recent, And even some of the exhibits were really something else. I think it was settled in 2022, but it's fairly recent. The depositions were unbelievable. I mean, the whole thing kind of like Rex Heuermann. There's photographs, but also it was in the context. It was upstate New York near Syracuse, and there were also murders, unsolved murders of young girls up in upstate New York that were similar in age to the victim at the time. And the time of her abuse, I believe, offhand was 71 to 78. And she was always complaining she had sent letters to people in the Lutheran Church about her abuse. And there's this child act that was passed, I think, by the New York legislature, allowed her to kind of bring suit again. And it was a $45 million suit. And there's actually a video of her, I think, even in this thing that I'm showing. And you can see a picture here of Kenneth Heuermann, if Nick, you can bring that up.
Yes.
But this is a really great article from Murder Inc. that goes in detail. This is the victim, RW, and just all the stuff, like really creepy, kind of like Midsummer, this movie. It reminds me of that. But that's Kenneth Heuermann, his dad's brother. It's basically who that is, I believe. Rex Heuermann.
And Murder Inc. does a great job in some of the delving deep into some of these unsolved murders, even in, for example, in Virginia, where his mother lived, and in this radius around her house where all these unsolved murders took place.
Oh, really? I wasn't aware of that. So here's some of the unsolved murders. It's Marzullo and Saunders. And then he had there was a description of a car that fit the description of Kenneth Heuermann's car around that time. But yeah, there's Syracuse. This map kind of goes through all that. But yeah, I guess they grew up alongside each other in Long Island. There was like a Heuermann clan. And I liken this whole situation to the film Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, where she comes across intergenerational abuse. That's kind of like the whole core of that film. But yeah, this is a really good article. But the lawsuit is something else. I mean,
yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask if that was legit, because I did come across this. I just did think this was just another weird connection with the family. And I was actually...
I mean, the Kenneth Heuermann case is all online. Lena sent me the link to the court case so I could go through everything. So I think it was a legit case.
Yep.
And they had, they went through the depositions. They had a trial date. They had expert witnesses who investigated and believed. Expert witness from Stanford, a guy by the name of Siegel or Spiegel. So it wasn't kind of a frivolous lawsuit. And it was actually in conjunction with 6 other abuse lawsuits in that general area of upstate New York that were all filed around the same time. So there was a group of lawyers all working on it. Well-known lawyers in upstate New York working on these cases.
Yeah, I've spoken. I think you did too. We spoke to one of the lawyers in that case. So
it's Ryder, Jesse Ryder. Does that sound right?
Yeah, it does sound right.
Charles Bonner.
No, it's Ryder.
Ryder. But yeah, here's another one of the cases in this whole 7 cases was Bruce Connolly, Buffalo area. There it is. 4 of the 7 new cases are outside the Catholic Church from the Child Victims Act. So, yeah, the Heuermanns, that's very strange. And then, they found I think they show it in this article, the belt with the WH on it. Traces to the grandfather, perhaps.
Perhaps, yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of an odd belt if you look at it. It looks almost like antique or like a wrestling belt. It's very unusual. And the script itself is...
Yeah, I even thought like the font or whatever, the style is just weird.
Yeah, I thought so too.
And where was this belt recovered? This was recovered from one of the victims' death scenes?
Maureen.
It was Maureen, I believe it was around her upper body.
Wow.
Or bound at her ankles. It was one of those.
Or maybe at ankles, yeah, I'd forgotten exactly.
It was used to bind, yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, I believe Asa Ellerup's hair was found within the buckle.
That's right.
Wow.
I was gonna mention now that you brought up the hair again because I'm stuck on the hair. And I know that you probably already know this, so it's probably nothing new. But with mitochondrial DNA, especially in the hair, because it is maternal line, if you were to look at the hair on Victoria and the hair on Asa, they are identical DNA because you do not have the genetic mutation on mitochondrial DNA as you would with regular DNA. So if you were to take a strand of hair and you say, oh, this could be Asa, it could also be Victoria's. It could also be the child, the boy. I can't remember his name. Sheridan, it was his last name, or Chris. Thank you. And it could also be identical to Joanna. So that is something also to consider with hair mitochondrial DNA.
Fascinating.
They're identical. I'm not talking about just like it's This is why sometimes you don't use hair DNA.
Interesting.
Yeah, I do find the DNA, even stuff with this case, just weird. I don't know.
And wasn't there another like series of like sex workers who were abused, I think in Connecticut or Rhode Island, that they never caught around?
Oh, maybe New Jersey?
Atlantic City?
Yeah.
No, there was another one. I'll have to look at my records.
Are you talking about the ones that were buried along the beach or up there?
I think so, and it was by the coastal town, maybe Newport or something like that.
Yes.
But they were never solved, but they kind of fit these types of crimes. So somebody kind of made, it's not that far. If you cross over Long Island to get to Connecticut, maybe an hour, 2 hours. It's not Atlantic City. I'll find this other one. It's something else. It's in my notes.
I believe it's maybe Massachusetts, William?
No, give me a sec. I'll find it.
Yeah, I believe victims along the highway in Massachusetts, perhaps.
Yeah.
Every state, probably.
Yeah, there's a lot of those cases, aren't there?
Yeah. And speaking of Atlantic City, what's interesting is the district attorney's own exhibit that he uses to supposedly exonerate the family as having been in Atlantic City, and then Rex joins them later, supposedly after he commits the murder. They were only 5 miles down the road from where a group of women were found murdered in a drainage ditch in Egg Harbor Township, right outside of the Golden Key Motel. It's interesting because those women, if I can remember the names, I know it was Molly Jean Dilt, Barbara Brader, Kim Raffa, and maybe another woman. They were found all positioned eastwards with their heads faced towards Atlantic City. They were missing their shoes, and they were all strangled. They attribute these killings to somebody called the Eastbound Strangler, who has never been caught. Interestingly enough, Jessica Taylor's pimp, Khalil White, in a letter to a judge, I believe in a human trafficking case in the mid-2000s, he writes to the judge and he is trying to check on the condition of his car, which he says he left at the Golden Key Motel. So there's all sorts of bizarre connections. Yeah. And the Heuermann family, at the same time that these women are found dead, are staying only 5 miles away. It's crazy.
Seems very odd, yeah.
Yeah, the whole Heuermann experience of this alibi, it raises questions. For example, it was put about in the beginning that Asa was in Iceland 4 times that these girls disappeared. She was in Iceland only once. And in Iceland, there's another connection we've discovered, which from the very beginning, I kind of like to say, well, I told you so. I suggested that the investigators should be looking at Iceland, what's going on over there with the Heuermann family. But she was in Iceland, supposedly according to plane tickets, said the DA, but only for one of them. The other times she was in Virginia, I believe,
Maryland was another one.
Maryland and New Jersey, and something like that. So in all those situations, other than Iceland, you don't really know if she stayed there or if she came back. None of those places are very far away from the site where these things happened, or Long Island anyway. And we don't know how long those girls were held.
I was just going to say that. Yes, we don't know if. Yeah.
We know that there's approximately 3 days that goes by from when she disappears to when her body is found. That much you do know. So there's a 3-day stretch. God knows what happened during that time. But if you look at what the Heuermanns were looking at in terms of these pictures and the statements, so important, the statements that I read at the press conference that were associated with these pictures. And you see that they're into long-term torture of girls. If they are into that, which it seems to be so, at least in their minds, in what they're looking at, then wouldn't that suggest that maybe the girls who were actually killed were also held for longer periods of time, which would mean that the vacation stretch, the alibi, falls apart because there's no evidence about when the girls actually died and when the Heuermann family came back from vacation.
Sure.
So finally, you have this other point on these alibis. Shouldn't you turn the prism around a little bit when you look at the evidence and say, wait a minute, if every time he killed the women that we now know of, the Heuermanns were on vacation, doesn't that suggest maybe that was planned?
Sure.
Yes.
If they're all in on it? I mean, at least it's a suggestion that should be looked at.
I thought that too. What's the odds? Come on.
It seems like a concerted effort. And was Rex procuring them for, for whatever? And when she got back, they're waiting for her. I mean, who's to say that wasn't the case either?
Sure.
It's just, yeah. I mean, you can get, who knows? William, was there anything else maybe that you wanted to add or ask, John, before we start to wrap it up here?
No, not off the top of my head. Thanks, though. Thanks for the invite. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. And what about you, JJ?
No, I appreciate the invite. And John, Lena, thanks again for your all's time. I guess the only lingering question I kind of think that bothers me with some of the activities that you all have presented relative to the family is, does their attorney, as Mr. Matev, is that his name? Is your former law associate, Mr. Ray, I believe, right?
Yes.
Does he maybe have a unique perspective? Like, where does he fall in as far as representing this family? But I'm assuming maybe has some perspective relative to the Gilbert case. Given that Gilbert hasn't been connected to the Heuermann case, I think it's clearly there's not like a conflict of interest necessarily, but it seems like he would have a unique perspective in his representation of the Heuermanns relative to some of the other circumstances surrounding all this activity.
Yeah, well, the first question should be, why did these two women, and the son actually, but why did the two women go immediately and get lawyers? They lawyered up.
Sure.
Innocent witnesses do not do that. And the police all know that. We all know as soon as you lawyer up, there's a problem there. You can't do anything about it because there are constitutional protections for that, but you can't deny that is very often an indication that something's up, something's wrong.
Sure.
They lawyered up before there was any question of them getting money from Peacock, and before there was any question of me accusing of Asa Ellerup of possibly being in the circle of suspicion. They had already their lawyers. So why? Nobody's answered that question. There's no need for lawyers if you're just bystanders. And they get paid an enormous sum of money, each of them, and the lawyers likewise, for this representation. The real question to me, JJ, is this: isn't there an inherent, really large, looming set of conflicts in the representation by Matev and Macedonio? Because if Matev and Macedonio are not paid to do what they're doing by their clients, they're being paid by Peacock. Yeah. And Peacock is not paying them like a relative who's helping out another relative and lays out the money. Peacock is paying for a performance to be shown to millions of people. And they've invested $1.1 million to the family alone, plus $400 to Macedonio and $200,000 to Matev.
Wow.
These people are beholden to the people who paid them, and that includes the family. So are they therefore witnesses in the case, the family? And are they then being paid by an outside source to perform for the outside source?
That's a great point.
The conflict is overwhelming. This should not be allowed in any, even if they're not actual witnesses but potential witnesses, the Heuermann family, the conflict still exists. And what happens when Peacock wants one thing to happen, or suggests that things be set up this way or that? I've done enough media to know how they operate, right?
Sure.
And Heuermann doesn't like that, doesn't want that to happen, or the DA doesn't like that and doesn't want that to happen. What happens then? Since the money's been paid, it's stunning to me that these issues have not been presented yet.
That's why I again, some people don't like looking at it like this, but I mean, financially, some of the people in that family have really benefited from this situation as well.
Sure.
Wasn't there a conflict with Matev?
I'm sorry?
Wasn't there a conflict with Matev because he suing for a FOIA for Shannon Gilbert, and that he was seeing resistance from Suffolk County PD, and they were giving him the runarounds or something like that, and he was kind of advocating. Did I read that wrong?
Say that to me again if you don't mind.
That Matev, I believe that I had read that Matev had filed a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request from Suffolk County to look into further the Gilbert case, and that he ran against resistance from Suffolk County, and he saw all kinds of resistance from Suffolk County because of the Gilbert case. And I think even filed a lawsuit against it. Again, I may have read this wrong, but my whole thing is that it sounded like he was advocating for the girls, and it sounded that he was advocating for the victims. And then all of a sudden he does an about face, and all of a sudden he's now representing the child of the person who supposedly he was trying to find, to have caused these murders.
Well, you're correct. The context is this, of what you've just said. When Matev worked here as an associate of mine, and then later on as a junior partner, but I think this took place while he was still an associate. He was working with me on the Gilbert case. He walked the marsh with me, for example, in Oak Beach. And he came with me when I knocked on doors of the Oak Beach residents and interviewed some of them regarding Shannon Gilbert. And then when we wanted to file a FOIL, we call it in New York, right? FOIL request in the Gilbert case, we put his name. It came out of my firm. It was my work, basically, and I did the drafting of it. We had to have somebody as a citizen, and I didn't want it to be me because I was running the case. So we had Mr. Matev put his name on it and made the FOIL request, and then we brought an Article 78. When the FOIL was denied, we brought an Article 78, a special proceeding, to have a judge compel the FOIL to be honored. We brought it unsuccessly under his name. I did all the oral argument. I did all the writing, and he basically was there for it. So you're right. He participated in all of that, and on top of that, now he's getting money.
And I guess that's where I was going. It's like, it just seems like he did an about face when he was advocating for the victims, and now he's bought and paid for. It seems like.
Yeah, he was always very as a lawyer here. He was always he was a good lawyer in the beginning, and he was a novice. He was just learning, but he was always deeply interested in being in the media. So that hasn't changed.
The case I was trying to remember is called the New Bedford Highway Killer. So you were right. Yeah. Whoever said it was South Massachusetts. And that was from 1988 to 1989. Right. So Heuermann would have been 24, 25. I don't know if there's a tie to it, but it was the same. It was 11 victims. And nobody was caught.
Yep.
I guess I want to ask you before we wrap it up. Are you what's next? I mean, are you kind of done? Are you still researching? Any other? Yeah, I guess we'll be expecting to hear more from you eventually.
You will be hearing a lot more from us as we go along. We're not backing away or down because we're taking a lot of shots across our bow. from these negatives. I call them negatives, who are on the internet and who are appearing in the media, saying that we're extreme and we're terribly cruel and nasty because we exposed what Victoria was looking at and went into that. So we're not deterred by it, and we're going to continue. I'm going to continue to work just as I always did. We're kind of like the watchdogs here. We intend to continue to be watchdogs.
Awesome. Well, that's great. Good.
Just great help here from Lena.
Nice. Well, that's good to hear. I was hoping that we would hear more from you because it's definitely some interesting work.
Yeah.
Appreciate you coming out and doing it. And I really, really do thank you so much for coming on the show. Like I said, it was really it was wild for me. Thank you. Really, you made my month.
Well, just remember, everybody, what Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison said at my press conference with him, which is a press conference, by the way, that he initiated. And he said, if you have any reason not to want to talk to the police, not to come forward to them, you have any fear, whatever it could be, there could be many reasons, call John Ray. That still applies. I take that official blessing from the police commissioner. That still applies. Call me. And many people have listened to him, and we have many more new witnesses who are willing to come forward. So we're going to keep that up.
Awesome. Great. Well, good luck on all your work.
Great.
Yeah, so if anybody, whatever, you heard them. Is there anything you want to plug or anything you want to advertise for yourself before we wrap it up? Or?
We do have a GoFundMe because all of the work that we do on this case is pro bono. The GoFundMe, if you just Google, it's called Magdalene Dismiss. That's the non-for-profit charity that we have. But if you just Google Magdalene Dismiss, GoFundMe, you'll find our GoFundMe for the charity.
Awesome.
Magdalene, like Mary Magdalene, and Dismas, like Saint Dismas. Okay, and it's a fund that we use just strictly for charity, for paying for some of the expenses of this enormously expensive work that we're doing here.
Oh, yeah, definitely isn't free. William, thank you very much again for helping make this happen and joining us. JJ, thank you very much for jumping on. And as usual, Lisa, always love having you on and having your perspective and what you can add. And thank you, everybody who is in the chat. That is what's up. I really appreciate it. There's a lot of people and a lot of good stuff added. So if people are watching the replay, definitely check out the chat. I think there was some good stuff tossed around in there. And again,
we're happy. We thank you as well for having us.
Thanks for having us.
It's an honor.
Thank you.
And
honors all ours as well.
Yeah.
and to be with JJ and William again is great. We're happy for that, and we hope that you can get this podcast published around and spread it. So as you do
for sure.
Yes, definitely. So that is the end of another Occult Rejects, and until the next one, everybody be well. Later.